Welcome to Leaders in Conversation, where we explore more human ways to work with leaders that are challenging the conventional wisdom. Although we're no longer in the industrial age, how we think about the nature of work is often still stuck in that paradigm. Being human at work is complex and challenging, but we believe it's worth the effort because it is the path to a more productive, engaged, and motivated people. I am your co-host, Ken Blackwell, and I'm here with my co-host, Amanda Cookson. And today's session is with futurologist and influencer, Dave Millner. Dave has a business background working in financial services, followed by 30 years of internal and external HR consulting experience at NatWest, PSL, Connexa, and IBM as an occupational psychologist. Dave is a regular presenter at global HR conferences, promoting the role of technology, people analytics, and the need for HR to be more commercial in its approach so that it can demonstrate tangible business value. His first book, Introduction to People Analytics on the Changing Role of HR and the Increasing Demand for Data Insights, was published in April of 2020. Dave is a key influencer on Twitter as @HR Curator. So Amanda and I want to welcome him today and joining us here. So Amanda, welcome. Dave, welcome. And Amanda, you wanted to greet folks on Zoom and chat, and I think give them a question to start prompting some thoughts on their end.
Yeah, thank you so much for everyone for joining us. I know at the moment people are kind of saying no more webinars. So I'm really, really grateful for everyone who is braving Zoom and joining us today. It's going to be a really, really good conversation. We are thinking about the future of work. And what I would love you to do is to put into chat where you are from. And also, I'd love to know what your predictions are for the post-COVID world of work.
Awesome. So Dave, let's get started.
Okay.
When we talked to you earlier, you talked about disruption as a catalyst for business transformation, and that many of the changes that we expect to see in the near future are driven by that. So why is it that disruption is a catalyst for change?
Well, hi to everyone, and thanks for involving me today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I think if we look back at the beginning of last year, which seems like an absolute bygone age, doesn't it? And everybody was talking about the future of work and, you know, the things about automation and all these wonderful things. And then the dreadful pandemic arose, and it's obviously had a global impact. And it was such a disruption that almost overnight, organizations had to suddenly change the direction that they were going in. And suddenly things that would have taken months, probably even a year to implement, suddenly happened almost overnight. And so I think that the degree of this pandemic, which nobody has ever really planned for, I think has really driven the organizations to have to, what I call, go through three phases of what I now describe as the now of work, because I think the future has sort of accelerated and we're suddenly now having to deal with things. But, you know, when I look back, I think, you know, lots of organizations have had to reset, you know, where they were at the beginning of last year, they've had to reset during last year. I think at the latter part of last year, beginning of this year, they're probably trying to renew and rethink about, well, what if we get back and what will we do and how will we change things? And I think for the latter part of this year and into 2022, it will be what I call a thrive, you know, where people will be trying to recreate that new normal. And I sense and I believe that that's really where the human-centric experience really kicks in. And obviously, you know, yes, I'm a data guy, but actually, you know, the way I look at it is, you know, every person is a number, okay? And behind every number is a human, whether it's an employee or a customer. And I think we've got to try and bring that into this data-driven world that we now find ourselves. So that's some of the things that make me feel that disruption has really shaken the tree. And, you know, this is where we're now at. And, you know, there's another exciting time coming up for HR and for all the leaders and managers, you know, out there.
So would you say that this disruption, which obviously has been wide scale and global, has it changed things or has it accelerated things? Because it seemed like we were on the path there, and one could maybe make an argument that this is just accelerated by 5 or 10 years, trends that were already there, or has it shifted our direction in some way?
I sense that it's probably a bit of both, which is not that, that's the sitting on the fence answer, but I think it's definitely accelerated certain things. Work patterns, the way we think about employees, that has definitely changed. It may have slowed down some of the bigger transformational programs for large or medium-sized corporates. But I think one of the things that struck me is I'm very privileged to be able to talk to a lot of different leaders across the globe in many different ways, and I sense that, I won't say for the first time, but I almost feel that every leader I talk to is now starting to understand A, how difficult their job is, and B, how appreciative they are or should be of their employees, and that maybe they need to get out a bit more and show that appreciation, because there are some real challenges coming our way. And I think the leaders, there was a report from Microsoft last month that was saying that leaders have sort of dealt with this challenge a little bit more easily than the employees, because now they've got quality time to think about decisions, to think about what they want to do. They don't have to go and talk to people, in a spontaneous way. It's all Zooms or Teams or go to meetings or whatever. So I think there's still a lot of work to do, but it's exciting because things that would have taken years, I sense there's more of an appetite now to actually try and change things for the better. But that can only happen if it's done with the employees, involving the employees, as opposed to it being done to them. So that's still a challenge that I perceive exists.
Like music to my ears, and I love that idea of thriving and having this human-centric experience. So one of the things that leaders say to me, which I think is really interesting, is they really struggle to think about how to create human connection online. So I
Yeah.
would love to kind of understand more from you, because I think regardless of where we work or how we work, as humans, we need to connect, we need to feel a part of something. And if you are going down the route of more hybrid working and more online working, how do you create a human experience? How do you bring your human into that really digitized space?
Yeah. I'm probably going to give you an answer that you might be surprised about. Okay. I've probably observed thousands and thousands of leaders and managers over my many years of assessment center, development centers, job analysis, work shadowing, job shadowing, you name it. Okay. And one of the things that I have been surprised about is the fact that managers are struggling with this remote management. But in actual fact, when you look at it, it's actually the same set of behaviors that they've probably had to adopt in a face-to-face environment, but actually they may have to prioritize different behaviors. They may have to refocus the way that they think about things. So I don't sense that there is a, you need to do these 5 or 6 different behaviors because you've never done them before. I think it's about reprioritizing how they connect with people, how they deal with them, and at the end of the day, my perspective about, what data has told me about a human-centric workplace is it's all about anticipating employees' needs, listening and acknowledging their concerns, helping them to go through change, explaining what's happening and why, getting their input, and making sure that they feel involved in the solution. And those might be in itself radical behaviors, but actually they're behaviors that have been around for years. And I think they probably just need to possibly put some of those at the top of the list in a Zoom context, as opposed to, doing them in an ad hoc way when you're in a face-to-face. So I sense that there is a similar set of key high-performing behaviors that leaders need to do. It's just that they're having to apply it in a different environment. But they're just going to have to get on and do it. Giving praise is still awkward for some people to do. you know, and doing it over Zoom is even more awkward. But some people have found that actually they feel more comfortable in that. They, you know, that lack of presence makes it feel a little bit more easier for them to do. But everybody is different. So does that give you some flavour as to what I'm thinking on that?
It does, yeah. And I think as a business, we've moved a lot of our activity online. And what I'm finding is you have to be really intentional. So you need to deliberately invest time in building rapport, getting to know people, making people feel comfortable. And I think that in a physical space, when you are working with people, you can see who's hanging out the back, you know, by the coffee machine looking awkward, who's sat at the front looking kind of keen as mustard. You can sort of move around and just get a feel for how people are feeling. Whereas when you're online, you need to check in with people, you need to ask questions, and you've only
Yes.
got so much of a person to read.
Yeah.
So I think you have to work harder with it.
I think I think you used a great, you know, they have to be a bit more intentional about their behavior. And I think that's great. And, you know, I know we're in a scenario where we're having to deal with it in this way. I desperately want to get back to talking to people face to face, because, you know, you don't get a lot back when you talk to a screen. You know, and I don't mean that in a nasty way, but we've got, I sense that in the longer term, it may make leaders better managers, because they're probably a bit more adaptable in how they, you know, behave to people, because they may understand that it's different on face to face as it is, you know, on Zoom. So I still think we all crave that face to face, and you cannot replace that. But at the moment, we're just having to put up with what we can safely do. So fingers crossed that we can get through this, and hopefully maybe 2022 will be the year of the human touch again, you know, in a literal sense.
Well, and that theme of intentionality, Dave, you mentioned earlier that the nature of virtual interactions allows for a little bit of intentionality. And what Amanda mentioned, and we've had other guests talk about the ability to be more intentional, and almost the need to be more intentional in their communication and how they interact with folks. What you were saying about reprioritizing behaviors, it's almost as if the virtual world is hyper in a way, right? It accentuates some of those, and so we need to be sharper with those
Yes.
in a way that maybe has been masked. Yes. Or is masked in the face-to-face. We're able to skate through a little bit more. And so, yeah, kind of sharpening these management behaviors. It would be a lovely thing if out of all of this awful pandemic, we ended up with leaders who had sharper leadership skills. That would be a lovely thing.
It would be great. And to be honest, I'll just take it if they just consider the people element just that little bit more. That would be a great win for me. But I agree, you know, to see some of the behaviors that I've seen drive high performance, you know, particularly in changing environments, you know, the disruption that the pandemic has created is ideally suited to some of those types of things. So, you know, that people can do it. It's just around this intentional word. I think that is a great word. I've written it down because I'm not going to forget that intention. I'm going to steal your brilliance there, Amanda.
Good. You're quite welcome. I mean, one of the things that I thought you might touch on, and this might be a bit controversial, so hold on to your seats. But I think one of the things that people find very difficult about working in this online way is trust. So I think a lot of leaders were lazy, and they could just look across the room and see heads at desks, and they can tick the box and think, yes, people are working, people are doing things. And in this space where people have freedom to work where they like, you know, for those organizations that didn't allow home working and now have had to allow home working, I think it's been really uncomfortable for leaders because they can't see what people are doing. And some of the kind of the software that's kind of out there to monitor and measure keyboard strokes and activity, I think is just about a lack of trust.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, you know, the whole digital shift that we're going through, the whole technology shift, the whole data shift, every shift we're going through is undoubtedly underpinned by the trust. And I know from data that I collected in my former life on thousands and thousands of leaders that, you know, they're very focused on results. They're smart people. They get things done, but actually the areas that are of lesser focus, that's my nice way of putting it, they don't do it. The areas of lesser focus revolve around, you know, the development of talent, the building of trust, and using what I sometimes describe now today as power skills. You know, in today's world, we've got the, you know, the automation, and everybody's worried about jobs disappearing and all of that stuff, and jobs will disappear, but they will re-emerge with a new different type of emphasis, maybe managing robots, maybe managing data streams, whatever it may be. But I'm absolutely convinced that the things that robots, machines, systems cannot do, which tends to revolve around innovation, you know, listening, questioning, understanding, solving complex problems that aren't necessarily logically flowing, and developing talent and etc. These are what I call the power skills. Some people may call them soft skills, but I think it's underestimating them. I think they're power skills, because in tomorrow's world, these are going to be the things that drive leaders, drive managers' behavior, and it's also going to drive the way in which the workforce responds to those behaviors. So I think those for me are really important, and I think we've got to start giving a bit more credit to some of the behaviors and some of the skills that we need for tomorrow, instead of thinking that, you know, we haven't got enough people who are digitally skilled. I have no idea what that means, and nobody's ever really been able to answer that, other than they can use technology systems. Well, you can learn that. You can be trained to do that. So I think that whole trust is a really critical thing. And I've always measured trust in a bit of a very simple equation as being competence, i.e. in their domain or their experience, times belief in people equals trust. And the belief in people is, you know, maybe people want to follow you, they trust you, they see you as a role model, they want to learn from you, and all of those sorts of things. And I think if you've got a business competence and you have this belief in people and it comes across to the people that work for you, I think that puts you on the journey of building that trust that you've mentioned.
Nice.
So it's David, it sounds like we need a different set of metrics from a leadership perspective, right? The things that were valued in the past, the things that you would want to have in employees, you know, the skills, the ability to do particular tasks, and the way we measure people. It seems like all of this now needs to change. To have a more human-centric workplace, we need to rethink how we measure individuals, how we measure leadership, how we even think about those interactions. So do you have some thoughts around what are some of the changes we need to make to the metrics that we even use?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and you could probably spend an hour just talking about that question. I think the key thing is that the rise of data and people analytics, particularly in the people space, okay, it has created some concerns, I think, for a lot of people, because they think that everything's going to be very clone-like. It's all going to be very data driven. You know, the data will make all the decisions, etc. And you could not be any further from the truth. Is that the way that I'm seeing large organizations using analytics is when they are very transparent with the employees about what they're doing, how they're doing. It's enabling them to understand what it is that they're trying to find out. So, you know, they're trying to find out in the area of, you know, retention, or in the area of onboarding, or in the area of any of the things on the talent practices that we use. You know, all of them are trying to be driven by data to make better informed decisions, which are, if you like, at the heart of trying to help the employees have a great experience at work. So I genuinely believe that that there's almost a magic triangle here between technology, the data that it provides, and the employee experience, and putting those three things together with the data helping you to help the employee get a better experience at work. You know, I've seen some great technology systems, and people always say, oh, you can't make technology very personalized. But I know that, you know, that there are systems out there where people will get a prompt, and it will say, oh, I see you're in this country today. There was a great article on, I don't know, design thinking in HR that's been issued by Harvard overnight. You Google searched that 3 months ago. We've put it in your inbox because we thought you might be interested. And for me, that's a great use of technology to make something personal to me in a learning capacity. So I think that, you know, if you've got data and it's being used in an appropriate, ethical and non-biased way, if it can be used in that format, I think that's amazing. And then that can then drive different learning metrics. It can drive employee experience metrics. It can then be used as a complement to not just the business metrics, which we will always have, but it will enable us to really have a proper scorecard where there are some proper people measurements that are really helping us understand, are we taking our employees with us on this journey, whatever that journey may be. So I think that's probably the best overview, Ken, without getting into micros on that, but I hope that makes some sense.
Well, we're going to have to dive into the micros at some point. Yes.
Oh, indeed, indeed.
So I'd love to dive over into chat. And I asked people their question about what their predictions are for the post-COVID world of work. So what I'm going to do, some of those predictions, and then I'd love to hear from you as to whether you think, yeah, we've got budding futurologists in the making, or whether it's kind of wildly different to your own kind of thinking. So we've got May from Coventry, who says she envisages more online dominated workplaces where employees are expected to be far more tech savvy. We've got Terry from Chicago, who says that he thinks there's going to be more creative workspaces outside of work and home. And then we have got, oh, it just says, I'm in Glasgow. I can't see who that's from. I don't know whether Ken, you can, but it says they think the future of work involves more hybrid and flexible working, and we need to be prepared for more disruptors and look how we can make our organizations agile and more able to cope with that. And
that
then
was Jenny
Alice,
Stewart from Glasgow.
Is that Jenny? Sorry,
Yes.
Jenny. It just says from on my little bit of chat. And then Alison has said that she works in the third sector where digitalization and virtual worlds have emerged in line with the pandemic, and they're going to optimize the successes and blend them with traditional community face-to-face work. So I think May's added as well about employees need to provide more training for employees to help them with this kind of virtual space. So those are the predictions from our chat. What are your thoughts then, Dave, about the future post-COVID world?
Yeah, they sounded pretty spot on, I think. So that I think they're really good views. I might just put a slight different emphasis on some. I do think, you know, there is going to be a change in work patterns. Okay, I call it work from here as opposed from work from home. I call it work from here because here could be anywhere, and I think that may involve the hybrid working. It may involve, you know, no working from home for some businesses or whatever. It's an interesting one. McKinsey's, they issue some data, and I'll just read it off here. They did some work, and they said that if everyone was vaccinated, 22% of US workers could work remotely for between 3 and 5 days. Okay. They then said that 17% would probably be able to work between 1 and 3 days, and 61% would work 1 day or less remotely. So that's a McKinsey prediction, but I think this work from here has sort of resonated with me because it could be it's anywhere. It could be it's in a coffee shop. It could be wherever, if we're also trying to introduce the face-to-face element as we go forward. I think leaders and the challenges of engaging a remote workforce, or a workforce that has got a hybrid element to it, I think is going to be challenging. Leaders seem to have found engagement particularly difficult. I don't know why. They seem to think that it's an HR issue, it's a business issue, and it's in essence the basics of what good leadership and good management is. I'm sorry if I'm upsetting some employee engagement vendors out there, but in essence, it's about doing the right things at the right time. So I think that is going to be a real focus for leaders, and it's back to our intentional behaviors that we were mentioning earlier. I think the productivity puzzle, as I call it, will continue. I'm concerned about the burnout and the well-being issues, which seem to be becoming very prevalent. So I think organizations are going to have to face those and consider ways to try and facilitate and manage that for the employees, because it doesn't seem to be working. It works. Productivity seems to have been maintained, but I guess my question is, at what cost? I think the Gen Z, so those who have just joined in probably the last 12, 15, 18 months, are probably wondering what the hell is going on here, because they've never had to work remotely. And so I think there will need to be something that will be required to re-energize them and get them to understand the organization that they joined, and why that reason was and what they need to do. Some organizations in the UK are reboarding employees. So in other words, as they bring them back into the office or into a hybrid area, they're reboarding them. And what they're doing is they're basically onboarding all their employees all over again and restating the culture, the values, how we need to do things now, etc. And I think that's quite important. I think authenticity for me is going to be a really important capability, because it won't just drive the trust and the respect that employees will require, but I do believe, and there is data behind it, that it will spur and improve the productivity and some of those well-being challenges, because we've had a tough year, and that's, I think, actually made work a little bit more human, if the truth be known, because we're having to formally talk to people probably a bit more. We're finding out a bit more about, oh, what's that behind your desk, and what's that picture? And so I sense that there is the possibility of making the work a little bit more human, and maybe we just need to reinforce that as we go on. I think the two final things that were going through my head were about networks, and obviously networking has become very formalized with the way that we're doing it. I'm just worried about the impact that may have on innovation, because I think everybody knows that innovation probably works well in a more spontaneous way. And when you have the ability to, bounce things off people, and whilst you can have electronic whiteboards and all the other electronic tools that we've got, I'm not sure it's quite the same. I might just be very old-fashioned. I don't know. I think the final thing is that talent has suddenly understood that it's now a global commodity. You do not need to be based in a particular city or even country. And so I think it's now broadening that and starting to make organizations understand that maybe they need to think differently about how they recruit, how they promote their brand, how they facilitate that. So those are some of the sort of things that I could see in the 2022 window, if that makes some sense, because I think anywhere beyond that, and I'm probably guessing even more than I'm guessing now.
Well, and there's a question in chat about the impact of the hybrid model, and I think there are some challenges with that. I think many times it's viewed as so this is going to be the best of both worlds. We'll have some people here and some people will be able to be remote. I remember not that long ago, being remote, and because of where technology was, that meant telephonically. And being remote in that sense was always being second class. You were always somewhat removed from what was going on in the room. People would often forget about you. It was often hard to hear or be engaged. And this too, I think, kind of weaves into that engagement piece. But in terms of what we look like going forward, to answer Naveen's question about the hybrid model, so how is that going to impact workplace culture in your view? How is this mix now that we're going to have going to change things?
Yeah, there isn't any data or stories currently out there that are indicating how it's going. I'm an advisor to a cultural analytics business here in the UK, and we had a lengthy chat about this just a couple of days ago. And the only snippet that I could share with you at the moment would appear to be that organizations are taking seriously the fact that it will impact on culture. They are definitely understanding that it has an impact. They don't understand quite yet to what degree, but there is quite a lot of talk about culture by design. So in other words, maybe this is the time for us to not reinvent ourselves, but revisit the perceptions that we have about our culture, about our values, about the way we do things around here, and see if that has a difference in terms of the expectations of employees, of managers, of leaders, and what behaviors does that start to promote that can both maintain the performance of the organization, but possibly even move it to a different level. So that's the best view that I've got at the moment. So I think culture by design is going to be something that's going to be quite interesting.
Which sounds like intentionality to me.
Yeah, it's back to that word again. It's back to that word. Yes.
It is. I mean, some of the things that have bubbled up for us as a business and with the businesses that we've worked with is that your talent pool has changed entirely.
Yeah.
And so where I live is very near to a city called Sheffield, and there are quite a lot of discussion and work about building the digital skills of the city and not having enough skills in the city to kind of meet the demand of the growing companies. Whereas if you can recruit from anywhere, then you don't need to worry about that.
No.
I think that what's also been nice is that people who have joined companies during the pandemic have been able to join from their village, from wherever they are. They don't have to move and live in a city that's kind of more expensive or doesn't suit them. And I think a huge challenge that we're hearing about is when organizations are like, okay, so it looks like everything's coming back to normal, so you're all going to need to come back into work, and you can kind of have it a couple of days from home, a couple of days in the office. And for some individuals, particularly if you're on a lower level salary, the amount of money it's going to cost you to come in for those couple of days means that it's not tenable for them to actually stay in that position. So I think there's going to be a lot of movement of people actually as organizations. Do you plant your flag, whatever it is, when you decide which side of the fence you're on, and whether you're going back to work fully online, leaving it up to the individual to decide, or whether you're going to be arbitrary about it.
Yeah, there'll certainly be some reconfiguration about how things get done. My son-in-law has just accepted a role of an HR director based in the middle of Ireland. And, he as far as they're setting up a virtual office in London. So, and, so things are changing because they're suddenly understanding that they need to have a presence in London anyway. So it's quite interesting, and maybe the smaller organizations are able to be a bit more what I call fleet of foot in terms of being able to respond and see these as opportunities rather than as restrictions. But I think the whole interesting thing, and Ian has asked a question, isn't hybrid working an existing model for global organizations? What lessons can we learn? And Ian's absolutely right. When I was working in IBM for from 2013 to 2018, 5 years of hybrid working. But and and that revolved around the consulting. So there is definitely consulting things where there is that expectation. There are some of the professional services types of organizations that are able to do it. I think some of the things that have been more challenging have been maybe customer support roles, maybe call center type roles, maybe obviously manufacturing support role. So I think that some of those roles, the learning is still to be acquired. We're still to learn how it worked and how it didn't work. But there is a lot of work around, particularly projects, consulting, accountancy, professional, where hybrid working has been, it's been almost a way of life anyway. And I think it's because we're now applying or trying to apply it across a wider and more diverse range of roles that I think it's being seen as a challenge. And I would see it also as an opportunity. So I hope that answers the sort of view, Ian, that I guess I'm seeing at the moment.
And yeah, I think time zone plays into this, right? And in terms of being able to be global, I think that's a limiting factor there. Although, I had a customer service call with my US based bank. And, as we got talking, I guess actually the rep asked me what time it was where I was. I told him, and he explained that it was that time, but AM. And we realized that, I was East Coast of the US and he was actually in the Philippines at the moment. So, it's like, okay. And no reason why he couldn't help me. He was very helpful, got all the things needed done, but he was half a world away.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's now this ability to be almost anywhere. What might drive people to go to a particular organization or not might actually be leadership. And you've just talked about leaders as being talent magnets. So maybe you can define that for us and then expand on that idea of leaders actually being talent magnets for organizations.
And this is a sort of it's a phrase I've used for a little while based on work, looking at what makes a digital leader. And the talent magnet is in essence, a magnet attracts something to it. And what the talent magnet is that high performing leaders, they create an environment that makes people want to succeed, wants to engage them, and more importantly, wants to help them grow. And so therefore, they're not almost, they are joining an organization, but they're probably also joining the leader because they sense that that person is going to be good for them in terms of, connections, motivation, learning, growth, challenge, coaching, mentorship, and energizing them to take their performance to a different level. And the talent magnet role, I think, is going to become more and more important because people will say, look, I want to go and work with Ken because he's done A, B, and C. And I know somebody who worked with him, and my word, they loved it, and they loved it because of the things that I want to get out of it. And so I think it's an interesting dynamic that's emerged from, that some of the work that I've seen, but I think it's definitely something that resonates when I look back over my career, and I also look back at other people's careers and see that actually they've made some steps that seemed a bit odd, but actually the thing that drove it was that person was the person that they wanted to connect with. And, if you look at other industries, sometimes that when a senior leader goes, they sometimes take somebody with them. And that might be, it could be a matter of convenience, but it could also be that the person loves working for that person and gets something out of it. So I think the talent magnet role of a leader is going to become more important. And I think it's going to be quite measurable in terms of, the amount of people you develop for workforce planning purposes, for succession planning purposes, that there are all sorts of different metrics that we can start to introduce, which really are going to force leaders and managers to have to change their mindset about development being something that somebody else does. It's something that everybody needs, and it's something that everybody's now expecting, thankfully, as we go forward.
Nice. There's something that you said earlier that I've kind of written down, I've highlighted, and I really want to kind of circle back to. So you said that you saw in the future authenticity as a capability, and I would love to just explore how do you develop authenticity as a capability, what does that look like? If I was working in HR and thinking, yes, Dave, I love the sound of that, but what does it mean and how do I do it? What's your answer?
Well, I think the key thing, it comes back to this. It's been a tough year that everybody knows. Tough year, 15 months. I sense that co-workers have probably leaned on each other in different ways. And I think that when you start to look at that different level of relationship, it starts to make people be a bit more authentic in themselves, because people understand that person a bit more. And I sense that, I think, was it people used to say you've got to bring your whole self to work? Was it there was some of that stuff going on before the pandemic? And I genuinely believe that leaders have really got to start to care. And I know that's not a word you associate with leadership, but I think leaders have got to show a bit more of a caring attitude towards their employees. So for me, the authenticity is about showing an interest in the whole person, making sure that we're focusing on, that it's not, we don't have a work-life balance anymore. It's about a work-life, facilitating that work-life situation. And I think leaders and managers have got to become more involved in it, instead of just expecting them, to have their emails responded overnight so that they can answer them when they get back to their work. So I think all of it is about having a genuine interest in their employees and their people. And I think it comes back to the talent magnet again, but I think it's that same sort of fix, that authenticity is so important. And I think, when we look at all of the desire of organizations to have diversity, equity, and inclusion, it will only happen if leaders make it happen at that level. And that is about making people feel valued, important, and feel that they're actually doing something that is important to the organization and its success. And I for me, that's where the authenticity has got to come from. You can't just have people saying it, it's got to be demonstrated through their behavior. And that's the word we keep using, but it is about behavior, because behavior drives the perceptions that people have about them. So that would be my take on it, I think.
I think it sounds like some of the things that people have put in chat. So Terry's talked about the relationship between work and personal life kind of being redefined and shifting and changing. And I think somebody down here had also mentioned about how the people are getting more of a sense of whether employees are juggling children, parenting, caring responsibilities, and that in the past leaders were kind of distant and authoritative and had that sort of cold kind of gravitas going on.
Yeah.
And now it's much more warm, embracing,
No.
understanding the human.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this is a really silly example, but I was talking to a CEO of quite a large company, and I had half an hour to do something with him, and sod's law, I was sat in exactly the same position as I am now, and my errant puppy decided that he wanted to jump onto my lap. Because he could hear a voice and couldn't understand how this Zoom thing stuck. So here I am talking to this very senior, very busy CEO, and this puppy has now landed on my lap. And oh, he's absolutely amazing. Oh, he's lovely. And the next thing I know, he disappears and he brings his dog. And I'm like, this isn't the conversation that I was expecting. But I sense that it's maybe made leaders and managers understand that there is another side to this. And we laughed about it. And it was a little bit of natural humor, spontaneous humor, which sort of made the connection between us a little bit more trusting, if you like, because I think we've got too hung up in the old world of command control. And I think, we've got to try and focus on performance development and empowerment. And that's where we've got to try and help employees understand that they've got some responsibility for that. But leaders and managers have got to lead the way. They've got to provide that role modeling that everybody talks about and don't know how to do. But I think people can do it. We've had quite a shock in the last 18 months. There's bound to be some more shocks coming our way. But I think we've got to, you know, grin, bear it, get on with it. But I think we've got to importantly understand that, you know, that the future is in all of our hands, and we have as much responsibility as leaders to help make that happen, I guess.
And so there's this paradoxical um, aspect of barriers here. So I think many people look at this virtual environment we're in now as being a barrier, and that it is bringing other barriers to it, when at the same time it is breaking through barriers, right? So the story about the puppies you just talked about, you know, that sort of personal interjection would have been hard to imagine, you know, 15, 18 months ago.
Absolutely.
Just wouldn't have been there, and certainly not with a CEO.
No.
And yet this mode we're in is breaking through that barrier. It's allowing us to see people with children, you know, who are insistent on coming in, or that, yes, you do have a life, and you're struggling with, you know, homeschooling your kids.
Yeah. And Amazon does deliver packages, you know, at the worst possible times, you know, but that's life. And I think that's, for me, is all about this authenticity, I think, really.
And so it's a breaking through those barriers, then I think, is now creating some equity and some connection in ways that wouldn't maybe have been possible had we never had this happen, right? So as we're looking at that, as we're thinking about our time here, let's maybe shift to thinking about the future and some advice for folks. So we going to ask you for some advice that you might be able to give to leaders, to founders, to HR leaders, that, you know, as they're looking to the future, things they might want to keep in mind, things they might want to be on the lookout for, or things to do. What sort of advice do you have for them in helping to navigate the now of work?
I think I think that the key for me is that this is a time of opportunity. We may not necessarily see it or describe it in that particular way, but I see it as a huge opportunity here, where we can go and start to understand that things may need to be different. And now let's grab the bull by the horns and actually start to see what that looks like, what that feels like. I think it's really important, more than ever, that you start to understand what's going on in the external world, because it's that there is such a lot of interesting stuff, and not all of it is going to work, not all of it is going to be right or fit for you, but I think it's important to stretch your mindset. It's almost back to this growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. It's almost around, you know, thinking about a growth perspective and what can you do individually to grow, to improve, but also how can that help your organization. So I think that for me is the one thing. And you know, I started all this Twitter and LinkedIn stuff, you know, because I was getting a bit bored and a bit lazy as a consultant, if the truth be known. I didn't realize it was going to get quite as ridiculous as this, with all these people following me and whatever. But I think the key thing is that I am constantly learning. And I think if there is one key skill or capability which will undoubtedly be required for anybody in every role, it will be the ability to continuously learn. Because, you know, the day will come, you know, our phones get updated overnight with new apps, don't they? You know, whether it's whichever operating system you're using. But that's going to happen in the business world. And so we're going to have to be able to learn and unlearn things that we've done. So I think for me, keep an external perspective, try and focus on, you know, people who can provide you with insights in a quick, simple, easy way. Try and focus on your own growth, looking at the opportunities that these types of situations are providing to you, and see how that can lend itself for the future, you know, because my perspective, you know, if I was talking to HR leaders in isolation, I would basically be saying, you know, this is the time when you need to be proactive and you need to be on the front foot. You need to be describing what the future of the organization it could look like, and how you and the function can work with the business to make that happen. Now, not many HR functions do that, but the ones that do have made huge successes of those types of things. So I think it's proactivity and external knowledge continuous learning. Those for me would be the critical things to keep your eye on what is going on in the external world.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please
Off on
go
a
ahead.
tangent. So I think that being a futurologist sounds like the most exciting thing. I'd quite fancy being a futurologist. And I think that if you can see into the near future, if you can have a sense of certainty about what's coming forwards, then you can be a little bit ahead of the game. So Dave, can you share with us just a few top tips on how do you get to know, to have kind of that confident sight of this is what I feel strongly is coming up in the next 3 years? How do you do that?
God, blimey. I think the first thing is I've been around rather too long. That always helps. So you can understand what's gone before and what's happening. So I think a little bit of grey hair may help from time to time.
I've got some of that.
Yes, I think it's about keeping your finger on the pulse. As I said, I'm very privileged to work with lots of companies and be able to hear what people are doing and all those sorts of things. And anybody can do it. You know, you can. I'm doing a session tomorrow on the future of payroll. Now that's not one of the things that really rings my bell, okay? But I've researched it and I've connected to people. I've spoken to them. I've found out, and then I've started to make a picture of how that looks. So I think it's about back on this thing, keeping your finger on the pulse. It's back to this continuous learning again. I think and trying to then project what you think could happen, because the future is everything that hasn't happened yet. Okay, so there is nothing like a bad answer or a wrong answer, because you know it's merely trying to understand the cause and effect of certain things. So that I think those would be my tips of just keeping your finger on the pulse. And back to the question, you know, that Ken asked about, you know, keeping that continuous learning going, keeping that growth mindset, and starting to, once you become, and everybody who will be on the call today will be a domain expert in some area. So build on that as the foundation and start to consider, you know, what could happen, what if that happened. And I always sometimes use, when I'm doing some research, I always use the from and to. So if we're here, what is the from, the today, and what could it go to? And it may be a bit stupid, but in essence, you'll always find the ability to try and move something from and to. So those would be the sort of simple little frames that I use that sometimes make sense for me as to what seems to be emerging.
Oh, I find it hard when I think about the future of work. My ideal, so my kind of ideal future of work is where leadership's democratized. So everybody takes responsibility for the future of work, where people have freedom and personalization to work in the way they do because it's more inspiring. And there are lots of things that I could, join the dots and say about why it's so brain friendly and why it's so great. But I feel that a lot of my aspiration for the future is more about my hope than perhaps reality.
Yes. Yeah. And it could be that maybe my risk background, in financial services, comes back to haunt me in some respects, because I always tend to look at, well, what's the risk of doing that? What would be the business? So I probably look at it from an organizational or business perspective first, rather than my own preferences. Although I try and weave some things in like talent magnets that I just want every manager and leader to do, because that would just make HR's job so much easier, and it would make every manager's and leader's role so much more fulfilling. But so there are things that you can use, but I tend to focus on a risk perspective, to say, what's the risk of not doing this? What's the risk of doing that? And so I think if you can keep 2 or 3 different thoughts at the same time, it can enable you to make sense of what seems to be emerging.
Nice. We run out of time.
It has flown by once again.
Yeah.
Dave, thank you for an engaging conversation that probably needed to be 3 or 4 times longer than this to get into all of the nitty gritty, and it was so rich what you were sharing. Thank you again for being here, and to keep people aware of what is coming up. So next month, May 18th, we are going to be back here, and shifting out of the co-host chair and into the guest chair is going to be Amanda Cookson, who's going to be here with another guest that we've had in the past, Jules Roberts, and they're going to be talking about human leadership. So please be here for that. Again, thank you all for watching. You can reach out to Amanda or I here. Please let us know how you found us. As you connect in or wish to connect in, let us know that you found us through Leaders in Conversation. And if you've got things to share, please do. And we look forward to seeing all of you as we come back again. And Amanda, any last words before we depart?
Yes. If people want to have more Dave goodness, how do they get in
Oh my
contact
goodness,
with
yes, we
Dave and
forgot that.
keep that conversation with Dave going?
All right. Okay. So you can. So I'll put it on the chat. So HR Curator. Oh, well, that was badly spelt. So ignore that one. So HR Curator is my Twitter handle. So there's about 28,500 people following me on articles that I try and share on a daily basis, or on LinkedIn, just go to Dave Millner. And you can link in with me, and I happily will try and share things or do whatever I can to help anybody. So as I say, please be delighted to. And you can see a bit more of the information. There's a website called hrcurator.com, so you can always look there for some of my favorite articles about all things leadership, analytics, HR, organizational change, and there's stuff about the book on there as well, where you can get money off and all that good stuff. So fire away, have a good look.
And we certainly encourage all of our listeners to connect with Dave and follow up, because obviously this is just a taste of the rich bit of knowledge that he has to share. So,
and thanks to everyone who joined us today, because I think everyone is beginning to feel tired of Zoom. So it's lovely that people have spent the hour with us today. So thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, no, thank you for listening and then getting involved. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. See you next month.